The night I came home from South Carolina, the air outside my little house in Savannah felt heavier than it should have. The porch light flickered, and when I turned the key, the silence behind that door told me something was wrong. My fingers trembled on the knob. For 40 years, I'd opened that door to the smell of fabric softener, to the sound of my old sewing machine humming from the corner room, to the echo of my husband Robert's voice asking if I wanted coffee. That night, there was nothing. Just stillness, thick and unnatural. When the door creaked open, my stomach turned. The first thing I saw was the hallway mirror shattered from top to bottom. My reflection stared back at me in broken fragments. I took one step forward and glass cracked beneath my shoes. The house smelled different, metallic sharp, like cold hands had been touching everything I owned. My breath caught when I saw the living room. Drawers open, cushions, ripped curtains torn down like someone had fought the walls themselves. My sewing desk was on its side, spools of thread rolling across the floor, red and white and blue, winding together like spilled veins. My framed photographs lay face down. The one of Robert in his workshop with sawdust in his hair was cracked right through the middle of his smile. I whispered his name without meaning to. The kitchen looked worse. Cabinet doors hung open. Cereal poured out across the counter, silverware scattered on the linoleum. The fridge door gaped wide like a mouth humming weakly. I reached out to steady myself on the counter, but my hand brushed against the overturned sugar jar, sticky and wet. That's when I saw the back door splintered at the lock, a jagged wound where wood had been pried apart. My pulse thundered in my ears. Someone had been in here long enough to know where to look, long enough to search carefully. I stepped into the hallway toward my bedroom, and the floorboards groaned as if the house itself was in pain. Every drawer had been emptied. My jewelry box overturned, every little keepsake gone. And then I saw the empty space under the window, the spot where Robert's cedar chest had always been. The one he built with his hands 30 years ago, the one that still smelled faintly of sawdust and linseed oil. Gone. My knees weakened. I grabbed the doorframe and whispered, "No, no, please." That chest held our wedding rings, the family photo album, Robert's letters from when he worked upstate, and the savings we'd kept since his passing. It was more than wood and metal. It was him. Gone. Just like that. I turned slowly, scanning the room for anything familiar, and then I saw it, the trail of mud on the carpet. Dark, thick, deliberate. I knelt, tracing the pattern with shaking fingers. The prints were wide, heavy, and marked with small oil stains. I'd scrubbed those stains from Caleb's work boots before. My son's. The sound that left my throat wasn't a sob, it was a hollow breath, the kind you let out when your heart realizes something your mind refuses to. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands pressed against the carpet, my eyes fixed on that trail leading back to the broken door. I reached for the phone on the nightstand, the receiver cold against my ear. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was calm, professional. My home, I managed. I think someone broke into my home. My voice cracked, each word slicing through the lump in my throat. Are you safe, ma'am? Are they still there? No, I whispered, looking at the shattered photo of Robert. They're gone. But they took everything. My voice fell lower. They knew where to look. As I waited for the sirens, I stood in the middle of that broken house, surrounded by the ruins of a life built with love and trust. The golden afternoon sun spilled through the blinds, cutting lines across the floor, touching the chaos with cruel beauty. For 23 years, I'd lived here believing home was safety. But as the sirens grew louder, I realized that safety had left with Robert, and tonight, even the walls seemed to know it. The officers were kind enough to stay until dusk, their radios murmuring as they cataloged what was gone. Detective Green promised a follow-up in the morning, but when their car lights disappeared down the street, silence settled again, the kind that crawls under your skin. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the space where Robert's chest used to be. Every sound in the house felt wrong. Even the ticking of the wall clock sounded like an accusation. I needed to hear a familiar voice, something solid. I reached for my phone, scrolling past names I hadn't called in years, until I landed on the one that mattered most. Caleb, my son. The boy Robert used to call his pride and trouble in one package. I pressed the call button. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Ma." His voice came through tired, distracted the background hum of a television behind him. "You okay?" "It's late." "No, I'm not okay," I said quietly. "Someone broke into the house. They took everything, Caleb. Even your daddy's chest." There was a pause, a small exhale. "You called the cops?" "Yes. They just left. But I can't stay here tonight. The door's broken, the lights don't feel right. I thought maybe I could come stay with you for a few days, just till I get things sorted." Another pause, the sound of him shifting a sigh that stretched too long. "Ma, look, I can't do that right now. Things are tight. I got bills. I don't need another mouth to feed in my house." My hand froze around the phone. Another mouth to feed. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Caleb, I'm not asking for charity. I'm your mother." "I know," he said, quickly defensive. I got a lot going on. Wendy's hours got cut and the baby's been sick. I can't handle another person here right now." The baby. His voice softened when he mentioned her, the one thing he hadn't failed at, but the coldness returned just as fast. "You'll be fine, Ma. Stay at a hotel or something. I'll check on you later." A hotel. The word felt foreign in my mouth. "I'm not some stranger. This is your mother's house that got torn apart." "I'm sorry," he said, but it didn't sound like sorry. It sounded like avoidance. "I can't help you right now." I didn't realize how long I'd been silent until the call ended. My hand dropped to my lap, the phone sliding to the floor. For 37 years, I'd answered every one of his calls. When his car broke down, when rent was due, when Wendy left him the first time. I'd cooked meals, loaned money, lied for him to bill collectors. Now, when I needed him, he closed the door on me without even standing up. My body went still. The air around me thickened with the smell of dust and old grief. I looked around at the chaos, the torn curtains, the upturned furniture, and for the first time, it didn't look like my home. It looked like evidence. The ceiling fan groaned overhead, its slow rotation stirring the smell of stale air and fear. I picked up the photo of Robert, brushed a thumb across the crack that split his face in two. "You were right, old man," I whispered. "We spoiled him with softness." "You warned me not to shield him from consequence." I heard Robert's voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me, the one memory that never faded. "May, you can love a child so much, you forget to let them grow, but if they take that love and twist it, you can't call it family anymore. That's survival." I folded my arms, pressing them tight against my chest. The wind outside scraped through the broken door like a whisper. I thought about calling again, about begging, but pride stopped me. Not the kind that comes from stubbornness, the kind that's left when all the giving is gone. I turned off the lights, double-locked what was left of the front door, and sat in the dark until morning. Somewhere past midnight, I thought I heard tires on gravel, a car slowing by the house. My pulse quickened. I stepped to the window and peeked through the curtain. A truck idled by the curb, the headlights dim. My breath caught. It looked just like Caleb's old Chevy, the one with the dented fender. But before I could be sure, it rolled away into the night, leaving only exhaust and the echo of a truth I didn't want to face. By morning, the house felt colder, stripped not just of things, but of warmth. I made coffee out of habit, though the taste was off metallic, like everything else in that violated space. My hands shook as I tried to steady the cup. The knock on the door nearly made me spill it. When I opened it, Ruth Ann Douglas stood there in her quilted robe and slippers, her gray hair pinned up like she hadn't bothered with a mirror. She held a small basket in her arms, cornbread wrapped in a towel, a jar of honey, and a look that said she already knew. "I saw the lights last night," she said softly. "And the police cars. You didn't sleep, did you?" "No," I admitted, stepping aside to let her in. She moved through the house carefully, her eyes scanning the wreckage like a nurse assessing damage on a patient she couldn't save. "Lord have mercy," she muttered. "They went through everything. Everything worth anything," I said, my voice hollow. Ruth put the basket down on the counter, then turned to me with that sharp look she'd perfected after decades of raising other people's children in the church nursery. "May Ellis, don't you stand there alone acting strong. Sit down before you fall down." I sat. She poured me coffee in a clean cup she'd washed herself, then reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was soft, warm, lined with time. "You don't deserve this," she said. "Not after all the years you worked for that house. For that boy." I swallowed hard. Detective Green said they knew where to look. They took Robert's chest, Ruth, the one he built before he died. Her lips pressed tight. "That chest. Oh, May." I nodded. "He carved our initials inside the lid. It was the one thing I couldn't lose." Ruth didn't speak for a moment. The kitchen clock ticked slow and steady while sunlight crept across the table. Finally, she said, "You call Caleb?" The question hung in the air like a test. "Yes," I answered. "He said he didn't need another mouth to feed." Ruth's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. "He said that to you?" "He did." Her voice lowered, rough with disbelief. "May, I don't want to meddle, but—" She hesitated, then sighed. "I saw Caleb's truck here 2 nights ago. Thought he was just checking in while you were gone. I waved, but he didn't wave back. Just kept on walking to your back door." The words hit like a blow. I stared at her, searching for something else she could mean, but Ruth wasn't a woman who spoke carelessly. "Are you sure I've lived across from you for 30 years?" she said. "I know your son's truck. Same dent in the bumper, same loud muffler. I figured he was doing you a favor." I pressed my palms together to keep them from trembling. My voice came out low, measured, but inside my ribs something cracked. "Maybe he was. Maybe that's all." Ruth's eyes softened. "May, I hope that's true. But hope's a tricky thing. It can make you blind." She stood and started clearing the counter as if she could clean away the truth with her hands. "You'll stay at my place tonight. No argument. Ruth, I can't impose." "You're not imposing. You're surviving, and I won't let you do that alone." That evening, I carried a small bag across the street. Ruth's house smelled of cinnamon and lemon polish, the kind of home that remembers joy, even in quiet years. She made tea, turned on the porch light, and told me, "You rest. Tomorrow, we'll think clearer." I nodded, but as I lay on her sofa staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles above me, one thought refused to fade. My son had been at my house. My son had keys, and my son had debts. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the broken lock on my back door, the muddy footprints, the empty space where Robert's chest had been. I lay still on Ruth's couch, listening to the creak of the ceiling fan and the soft hum of the refrigerator, and my mind drifted backward to a time when everything was simpler, when the house still smelled like sawdust and fresh bread. I was 28 the first time I saw Robert work a piece of cedar. He stood in his workshop behind our old house. Sleeves rolled up sawdust in his hair, humming a gospel tune under his breath. He didn't talk much while he worked, just ran his calloused fingers over the wood like it was something alive. "You can tell a man's truth by his hands," he'd said once, eyes glinting in the light. "If his work's honest, his heart usually is too." That's what I loved about him. He didn't talk about trust. He built it. Over the years, those hands built cradles, cabinets, tables, and finally that chest. He made it the spring before he passed. Caleb was 12, still chasing stray baseballs through the yard, always barefoot, always loud. Robert carved our initials into the lid, R and M-E, and told me, "If life ever breaks you, that box will remind you who you are." I'd laughed at him then, not knowing he meant every word. When he died, that chest became more than wood. It was the last sound of his hands on this earth, the smell of his labor, the proof that he'd existed. Inside it, I kept the letters he'd written me from his time in Augusta, our wedding rings, and a small envelope with $5,000 in savings. Caleb had never known about the cash. He only knew the chest was special. He used to sit beside his father, handing him nails, asking questions about the carvings. Robert would grin and say, "Son, one day you'll build something that lasts too." I wondered now if that memory meant anything to him. Maybe it was too long ago. Maybe life had worn it out of him. The image of Robert's strong hands turned into the image of Caleb's greasy from the garage, tapping restlessly on his phone when I talked too long. My boy used to look like his father, but somewhere along the line, the resemblance became painful instead of comforting. I pressed my palms together and whispered to the dark, "Robert, I'm trying." Outside, a car rolled past its headlights, brushing across Ruth's curtains like ghosts. I thought of the way the cedar chest used to glow in the morning sun, the gold grain shining through every polish, the smell that made the whole house feel alive. Now it was gone, maybe sitting under fluorescent lights in a pawn shop, maybe tossed in the back of a truck. Either way, it was no longer ours. That realization hurt more than losing money or jewelry. You can buy those back, but you can't buy back something built with love. By dawn, I sat on Ruth's porch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the sky turn pale pink over the pecan trees. My breath fogged in the air. Somewhere deep in the house, Ruth's radio started playing old hymns, the same ones Robert used to hum while he worked. The melody carried across the street through the broken door of my empty house, and I swore for a second I could almost smell cedar again. It was then I made myself a promise I was going to find that chest, even if it meant facing the truth I didn't want to see. Detective Paul Green arrived just after 9, his car crunching over the gravel in Ruth's driveway. He was the kind of man who carried silence like a badge mid-50s, calm eyes, slow movements. When he stepped into my house, he didn't say much at first. He just looked. His gaze moved from the broken door to the muddy tracks on the carpet to the upturned furniture in the living room. He crouched near the back doorway, running his fingers lightly over the wood where the lock had splintered. "They knew where to pry," he said quietly. "Didn't kick it in. Used a flat tool, maybe a crowbar. That's patience, not panic." I stood behind him, my arms folded across my chest. "So they planned it?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Someone who knew you'd be away. Someone who knew what was worth taking." The words sank like stones in my stomach. Ruth hovered nearby, her face drawn tight. "How long you think they were in here?" she asked. "Hard to say," Green replied, standing, "but long enough to know where to look. This wasn't random." He turned to me. "You mentioned your son in the report." My throat tightened, only that he knew I'd be out of town. He wrote something in his notepad. "Does he have a key?" The question hung there too heavy to catch. I nodded slowly. "Yes. I gave him one last year when he came to fix the sink." Green met my eyes, steady but not unkind. "Anyone else know about your trip? My sister in South Carolina. A few folks from church. The mailman because I asked him to hold the mail." I hesitated. "And Caleb, of course. He asked how long I'd be gone." The detective's pen stopped moving. "And you said 2 weeks." The room seemed to shrink around me. He closed his notebook gently. "I'll run the usual checks, pawn shops, second-hand stores. But if you think of anyone who might have known where you keep valuables, you let me know." I nodded, though the answer was already clawing at the back of my mind. After he left, Ruth and I walked through the rooms again. She helped me pick up the frames, sweep the glass. But every corner of that house whispered the same thing: someone had searched it with purpose. Not the wild kind of search a stranger does, but a slow, knowing one. I stopped in the bedroom, staring at the bare patch of carpet where Robert's chest had stood for decades. The imprint was still there, a ghost outline. "Ruth," I said softly, "when you saw Caleb's truck that night, was the porch light on?" "No," she said. "Dark as midnight." "And what time was it? Maybe 10:30, close to 11. I turned away before she could see the tremor in my mouth. 10:30. The exact time Caleb used to finish his evening shifts at the garage. The coincidences stacked up like bricks around me. Ruth put her hand on my shoulder. "You don't know anything for sure, May. Don't go hurting yourself with maybes." But she didn't sound convinced. I went to the sink, turned on the faucet, and let cold water run over my hands. My reflection in the window looked older, harder. The kind of woman life forces to face things she doesn't want to. The detective's words echoed. They knew where to look. I thought of Robert again, his warning years ago after Caleb's first trouble with money. "That boy's heart is good, May, but if you keep saving him one day, he'll stop saving himself." I'd spent my whole life believing love could fix anything. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening, when the light faded and the house went quiet again, I stood in the doorway of Robert's old workshop behind the house. His tools were still on the wall, neat, untouched, but one hammer was missing, the one Caleb always borrowed, the one he never returned. I closed my eyes, feeling the pieces fall into place, cold and heavy as nails. By Friday afternoon, the air in Savannah felt thick enough to chew. I hadn't slept in 2 nights. Every sound made me flinch: the screen door rattling in the wind, the thud of a neighbor's trash can. even Ruth's voice calling from across the street. I couldn't take the guessing anymore. I needed to see Caleb face to face to look him in the eye and ask for the truth. His house sat on the edge of town, a narrow duplex with peeling paint and a crooked mailbox. The driveway was littered with beer cans and an old lawnmower that hadn't seen work in months. I parked across the street, clutching the photo of Robert's chest that Detective Green had printed for me just in case. My fingers ached from holding it too tight. Caleb answered on the third knock. He looked surprised, but not pleasantly. His hair was a mess. Eyes bloodshot, shirt half-buttoned. "Ma, what are you doing here? I needed to see you," I said. "You didn't call back." He rubbed his forehead. "Yeah, been busy." "The garage has been crazy." I stepped inside before he could object. The house smelled of stale beer and motor oil. Fast food boxes stacked in corners, laundry spilling off the couch. I'd cleaned this same mess 100 times when he was younger, back when I still believed I could scrub his problems away. "You want something to drink?" he asked, already sounding impatient. "No, thank you." I stayed near the door. Detective Green came by again. He said whoever broke in knew where I kept things where I hid the spare key. You were the only one who did. His jaw tightened. "You think I'd steal from you?" "I don't want to think that," I said quietly. "But I need to hear it from you." He laughed under his breath, sharp and humorless. "You've always had a talent for blaming me, Ma. Every time something goes wrong, it's my fault." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When the bills got behind after Dad died, you said I wasn't doing enough. When Wendy left for a month, you said I wasn't patient. Now you're saying I'm a thief. You ever stop to think maybe life just hates me?" The words came out rehearsed, practiced, like he'd been using them for years. "This isn't about life, Caleb. It's about choices." "Oh, spare me the lecture." He snapped, pacing. "You think because you worked 2 jobs and never missed church you're better than me. You don't know what it's like trying to stay afloat." "I know exactly what it's like," I said, voice steady. "I did it with less than you've ever had." He turned eyes hard now. "You think I'd take that old box?" "What would I even do with it? I don't know. Pawn it, maybe. You told me last month you were short on rent." He barked a laugh. "So now you're a detective too. Maybe you should join your friend Green, see if he wants a partner." I looked around his living room. On the coffee table sat a stack of unopened bills and a pawn receipt folded under an ashtray. I didn't touch it, but the sight of it made my stomach twist. "Caleb," I said softly, "if you're in trouble, we can fix it. But if you lie to me, I'm not lying." His voice rose so fast it startled even him. "You always do this." "You twist things to make me look like the problem because you are the problem," I said before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was thick, dangerous. His nostrils flared. "You think I wanted this life. You think I wanted to be some broke mechanic while you sit in that old house judging me. You don't know what I had to do to survive." "Then tell me," I pleaded. "Tell me what you did." He looked away, his eyes darting toward the hallway. "You need to leave, Ma. Not until you tell me the truth." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Go home. You don't want to know." My heart cracked open right there. He didn't deny it anymore. He just refused to say it. That was worse. I took a step back, my throat closing up. "Robert raised you better than this," I said. "Robert's dead," he snapped. "And so's whatever fantasy you keep living in." The words cut through me clean. I left without another word, the photo still crushed in my hand. The screen door slammed behind me, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I cried in public. But not for the chest. Not even for the loss. I cried because somewhere between my son's voice and his silence, I realized I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just the last person who still believed he could be saved. The next morning, I sat at Ruth's kitchen table with the pawn receipt burned into my mind like a brand. I hadn't touched it last night, hadn't dared, but I saw enough of it to remember the name printed at the top. Savannah Resale and Loan. Ruth poured coffee, watching me with quiet eyes. "You going there, aren't you?" she asked. "I have to," I said. "If I'm wrong, I'll live with that. But if I'm right—" "If you're right," she finished, "then you need to stop calling it love and start calling it survival." It was a small shop near the old docks, the kind that smelled of metal and cigarette smoke. The clerk was a heavy-set man with a gray beard and tired eyes. His name tag said Dale. When I stepped inside, the doorbell jangled like a warning. "Help you, ma'am?" he asked without looking up from the counter. "I'm hoping so," I said, placing a folded photograph in front of him. It was the one Detective Green had printed Robert's chest, the carved initials, the brass hinges polished bright. "This was stolen from my home 2 nights ago." He squinted at the photo, then frowned. "That looks familiar." He turned toward the back room, muttering. My heart hammered. A few seconds later, he returned, holding something wrapped in a gray cloth. He laid it on the counter, pulled back the fabric, and there it was. Robert's cedar chest, scratched but unmistakable. The initials still glowed faintly under the overhead light. My breath caught. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "Guy came in yesterday morning," Dale said. "Said it was his dad's. Needed cash for bills. I gave him $150 for it. Paid cash." "Did you get a name?" He nodded, reaching under the counter for a clipboard. "Caleb Ellis." My knees almost gave out. I gripped the counter to stay upright. "You can't take it back till the police clear it," he said gently, misreading my silence. "But if it helps, I'll give the officer my statement." I nodded, my voice barely there. "It helps." When I stepped outside, the sky was overcast gray as unwashed linen. I called Detective Green from the sidewalk. "You found something he asked?" "He pawned it," I said. My son pawned Robert's chest. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. "Stay put," Green said finally. "I'll meet you there." He arrived 15 minutes later, his unmarked car pulling up to the curb. Inside the shop, he took statements, photographed the receipt, and had Dale sign a report. When it was done, he turned to me. "You were right, Mrs. Ellis. He used his driver's license for the transaction." "There's no doubt." I nodded slowly. The words didn't feel like victory, they felt like gravity. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I thought of Caleb as a boy, building wooden towers in Robert's workshop, laughing when they fell. I thought of him crying at his father's funeral, his hands gripping mine like he'd never let go. "I need time," I said. Green gave a small nod. "You have it. But he'll know we've got him soon." As I drove home, the world outside blurred through tears I couldn't stop. Ruth was waiting on the porch when I pulled up. One look at my face and she didn't ask, she already knew. "He did it," I said. "He sold the only thing his father ever built with his own hands." Ruth took a deep breath. "Then it's time for you to stop fixing and start fighting." That night, I sat alone in my house, the air thick with silence. I opened Robert's old Bible, the one he kept on the dresser and tucked inside, was the first letter he'd ever written me. His handwriting was strong, deliberate. "Love is not blind, May. It just chooses when to see. When the day comes that you must see clearly, don't flinch." I stared at those words until they blurred. Tomorrow, I decided I would stop flinching. The next morning, Savannah's heat pressed heavy against the windows, but I woke with a cold resolve. I'd spent my whole life protecting Caleb from consequences, bailing him out of traffic fines, covering his debts, lying for him when he wrecked his father's truck. Robert used to warn me gently but firmly that love without truth turns into weakness. I never understood that until now. Today, truth had to stand on its own. Detective Green met me at the station just after 9. His uniform looked sharper than usual, his expression careful measured. "You ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. We went through the paperwork together. The complaint form was simple enough. Name of suspect relationship, nature of theft. Writing Caleb's name next to suspect felt like pressing a knife through my own chest. My hand trembled, but I signed it. Green read through the final details and slid the report toward me. "Once I file this, it's official," he said. "There's no undoing it. He'll be brought in for questioning." "I understand. Are you sure you want to press charges?" "I'm sure," I said quietly. "Not because I want to see him punished, but because I need him to understand that I'm not his safety net anymore." Green studied me for a moment before nodding. "That's the strongest reason I've heard in a long time." It took less than an hour for things to move. Green's partner radioed in from the pawn shop Caleb had returned, demanding his property back. He was loud, angry, and refused to show ID. The officers detained him on the spot. I didn't ask to see it, but Green told me he'd been shouting that it was all a misunderstanding. When I left the station, the humidity felt heavier than ever, pressing down on my skin. Ruth was waiting at home, her arms crossed on the porch rail. "Well?" she asked. "They've got him," I said. Her eyes softened with pity. "May, I know that doesn't make it easier." "No," I whispered, "but it makes it real." Inside, I sat at the table where Robert's Bible still lay open. The fan hummed overhead. My phone buzzed an unknown number. For a second, I thought it was the police, but when I answered, it was Caleb. "Ma," his voice cracked tired but still defensive. "You didn't have to do this." "I didn't want to," I said evenly, "but I had to." He scoffed. "You think calling the cops is going to fix anything? They said you pressed charges. You, my own mother. You stole from me, Caleb. I borrowed. I was going to buy it back next week. Then why didn't you tell me?" He didn't answer. I could hear his breathing shallow and fast. "You've always made me feel small," he said finally. "Like I'm never good enough for you or for Dad." "That's not true." "It is," he snapped. "You and your perfect little world. You think pressing charges makes you righteous? You're just alone now. You've got no one." I closed my eyes. "Maybe, but I still have my name, and that's something you can't pawn." Silence filled the line. Then came his voice again, quieter this time, almost childlike. "Ma, what happens now?" "The same thing that happens to anyone who crosses a line too many times," I said. "You face it." He muttered something I couldn't catch, half curse, half plea, then hung up. I set the phone down gently, though my hands were shaking. By late afternoon, Detective Green called to confirm Caleb's bail hearing was set for Monday. He'd been booked on misdemeanor theft since the chest was recovered intact. Still, it was enough to stain his record and his pride. When the call ended, I stepped onto the porch. The sun was setting over the pecan trees, the sky painted in streaks of gold and ash. For the first time in years, the air felt still. Ruth came over and handed me a glass of sweet tea. "You did right, May," she said. I nodded. "Doing right doesn't always feel good." "No," she said softly, "but it lasts longer." As the evening deepened, I thought about Robert again. He would have been proud, not because I sought justice, but because I finally stopped mistaking mercy for weakness. That night, for the first time since the robbery, I slept without fear. But peace has its own cost, and I could already feel the weight of it waiting for me come morning. Monday came with the still heat of summer, the kind that makes the courthouse steps shimmer like glass. I wore Robert's old watch and a pressed blue dress, simple, quiet strength. Ruth came with me, her hand steadying my arm as we climbed the stairs. Inside the courtroom buzzed with whispers, fans spinning above rows of wooden benches. I sat near the front, my heart drumming a slow, steady rhythm of disbelief and resolve. Caleb entered through the side door wearing wrinkled khakis and the same gray shirt I'd folded for him last Christmas. His wrists were free, just escorted, not cuffed, but he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge, a tall woman with kind but firm features, called the room to order. Detective Green was there too, seated beside the prosecutor. When he saw me, he gave a small nod, professional but respectful. The bailiff read the charge aloud. 1 count of misdemeanor theft, the unlawful taking of property belonging to Mrs. May Ellis. Hearing my own name in that sterile room made my stomach twist. Caleb shifted his jaw, tight eyes flicking toward me for just a second before darting away. When the judge asked for his plea, he hesitated. "Guilty, Your Honor," he said, finally, voice cracking halfway through the word. The sound of it hung in the air, heavy as rain about to fall. The judge reviewed the documents, then looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Ellis, do you understand what you've admitted to?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you understand that the person you stole from is your mother?" He flinched, his throat working as he swallowed. "Yes." She paused before continuing. "I see here your record is clean. That tells me this wasn't about crime, it was about desperation and betrayal. But that doesn't make it less serious." The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the fan. I kept my eyes on the floor, afraid that if I met his, I'd lose my resolve. The judge continued, "Given the restitution and the cooperation of both parties, I'm sentencing you to 100 hours of community service and mandatory financial counseling." Caleb nodded numbly, shoulders slumped. "Yes, ma'am." Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Ellis, you've shown grace by cooperating fully and allowing recovery of your property. Do you wish to address the court?" My pulse roared in my ears. I stood, clutching the edge of the bench for balance. "Your Honor." I began, my voice low but clear. I'm not here for punishment. I'm here for truth. That chest he sold, it wasn't just wood. It was the last thing his father ever built. My husband carved his initials beside mine to remind us that love leaves something behind when we're gone. I just needed my son to understand what it means when you sell that for cash. The judge listened quietly, then nodded. I believe he does now, Mrs. Ellis. Caleb looked up then, and for the first time his eyes met mine. There was no arrogance left, just shame and something fragile, almost like grief. After the hearing, I waited in the hall. When he came out, escorted but free, he stopped a few feet away from me. His voice was low. They said I can't contact you for 60 days unless it's about restitution. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. I nodded. That's a start. He looked down at the floor, then back up. They'll make me work at the community center off Victory Drive. Fixing things mostly. Good, I said. Your father would like that. He gave a small, bitter laugh. I doubt it. I took a breath. You'd be surprised what pride looks like when it's quiet. He blinked, swallowed, and then just said, Bye, Ma. I watched him walk down the hall, shoulders bent under a weight I couldn't carry for him anymore. Ruth stepped up beside me, her hand brushing mine. You okay? I will be, I said. But it's strange seeing justice and heartbreak share the same room. Ruth sighed. That's life for women like us. We carry both and still stand. As we walked out into the sunlight, I looked down at Robert's watch, its steady ticking against my wrist. For the first time in years, the sound didn't hurt. It reminded me that time doesn't heal everything, it just teaches you what's worth keeping. The house felt different when I came home that afternoon. The air was still heavy with heat and memory. Robert's chest sat back in its place under the window, the brass hinges newly polished by Detective Green's team. They'd returned it 2 days before the hearing cleaned and cataloged, though some of the carvings were scuffed. I ran my fingers over the initials, R and M-E, and felt the grooves like they were breathing again. It wasn't just wood, it was survival. I made tea and sat by the window, the late light spilling gold across the floorboards. Across the street, Ruth watered her roses. Every few minutes, she'd look up to make sure I was all right. That woman had become my anchor without ever asking for it. The phone rang just after 5. The number was familiar Wendy Caleb's wife. I let it ring twice before answering. Mrs. Ellis, she said, her voice tight, polite but sharp around the edges. I just wanted to say that what you did to Caleb was cruel. I stayed quiet. He's been humiliated. People at church are talking his job's on the line, and he said you didn't even try to help him before calling the police. I took a slow breath. Wendy, I didn't ruin your husband's life. He did that when he chose to steal. You could have handled it privately, she hissed. Family doesn't drag family into court. Family doesn't rob each other either, I said. And if you think this is about embarrassment, then you never understood what we lost. There was a pause, then a sharp exhale. You always act like you're better than everyone, Mrs. Ellis. Maybe that's why Caleb never visits. Her words hit harder than I wanted them to, but I didn't let her hear it. You tell Caleb, I said calmly, that the door is closed until he learns what the word respect means. She hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. The house was too quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm when you realize the wreckage is yours to clean, no matter who caused it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through each room, touching the walls, the furniture, the familiar things that had survived. Every mark told a story, the scratch on the floor, from when Caleb learned to walk, the dent in the doorframe where Robert had measured his height every birthday. These were the ghosts that stayed. Around midnight, a car slowed outside. My heart jumped. I moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. A shadow stood near the mailbox, still uncertain. Then I saw it, the silhouette of my son. He didn't come to the door. He just stood there for a few moments, looking at the house hands in his pockets. The streetlight caught his face, tired and pale. Then he turned, walked back to his car, and drove away. I didn't call out. I didn't wave. I just whispered, Lord, keep him safe, but keep him honest. The next morning, I found a small envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a folded note written in Caleb's messy scrawl. It said only 4 words, I can't fix this. I sat on the porch steps holding that note, the sun just starting to rise. For the first time, I didn't cry. Maybe some things weren't meant to be fixed. Maybe they were meant to be faced. Ruth came over with coffee, handing me a mug before I could even speak. You saw him, didn't you? I nodded. She sighed, settling beside me. Sometimes justice isn't loud, May. Sometimes it's just a quiet man realizing what he's lost. I looked out at the pecan trees lining the street, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. Then I guess justice has finally arrived. Ruth smiled sadly. So has peace. I wasn't sure if peace was the right word yet, but it was close enough. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Caleb again. Every day, I'd check the mailbox out of habit, not hope. Then, one morning, just as the sun pushed over the trees, there it was, a thick brown envelope with my name written in his shaky handwriting. No return address, just a postmark from a county 2 towns over. I carried it inside like it was something fragile, sat at the kitchen table and stared at it for a long minute before opening it. The first page was short. Ma, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve to be called your son right now. I just wanted you to know I finally see it, what you were trying to teach me all those years. I thought love meant you'd keep fixing my mistakes, but I get it now. Real love doesn't save you from the fall. It lets you hit the ground so you can finally learn to stand. I've been working at the community center for a week now, fixing tables, patching walls, mending things. Maybe that's what I was always supposed to do. Mend what's broken. There was a pause in his handwriting there, like he'd put the pen down to breathe. I told the director about Dad's chest. She said I should try to build another one, not for money, but for understanding. So I started. It's not perfect, but I'm using cedar like he did. Every time I sand a board, I think about his hands and about you. I can't fix what I broke, but maybe I can build something better. The letter ended with 3 words that hit harder than any sentence before it. I'm trying, Ma. I laid the paper on the table, tracing the ink with my fingers. For a long time, I just sat there, the clock ticking behind me, the smell of coffee growing cold in the air. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside Robert's cedar chest, between the wedding album and the envelope of savings that had somehow survived the chaos. The wood gave a soft creak, like it was breathing again. That afternoon, I called Detective Green to thank him for everything he'd done. "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Ellis," he said. "You did the hard part. You told the truth." After we hung up, I sat on the porch with Ruth, both of us watching the slow drift of clouds above the pecan trees. "He wrote," I said quietly. Ruth didn't ask what the letter said. She just nodded. "Good. Words are a start." I looked down at my hands lined with years of work and care. "Do you ever wonder," I asked, "if being a parent means knowing when to let go?" Ruth sipped her tea before answering. "No," she said. "It means knowing when to hold your ground so they can learn where solid earth begins." The truth of that settled deep in my chest. That evening, I walked through the house with the windows open. The air smelled like rain, coming heavy and clean. The walls didn't feel haunted anymore. They felt lived in. Every scar, every repaired crack, every memory was part of the same story. Before bed, I knelt by the cedar chest one last time and whispered, "Robert, I think he's learning." I could almost hear his laugh in the back of my mind, low and certain. "Told you, May. Our boy's hard-headed, not heartless." I smiled then, not a full smile, but enough. For the first time in months, I turned out the lights without fear. The darkness didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like the world making space for something new. Somewhere out there, my son was sanding a piece of cedar, trying to turn guilt into growth. Maybe that was all the forgiveness either of us needed. 6 months later, the world felt different. Softer maybe, or maybe I had just stopped holding my breath long enough to feel it. The summer heat had given way to a gentler fall, the kind of weather Robert used to call forgiving. The leaves along Maple Street turned amber and gold, brushing against the windows as if to remind me that even the most broken seasons still change. I had found a rhythm again, morning walks with Ruth, coffee on the porch, and volunteering twice a week at the church pantry. I never thought I'd find peace in routines again, but peace I'd learned isn't the absence of pain. It's learning to live beside it. Then, one Saturday morning, I heard a soft knock on the door. Not the hurried rap of strangers or the nervous tapping of apologies, just 3 steady knocks. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Caleb stood there, thinner than I remembered, wearing a plain denim shirt and holding something wrapped in a cloth. His eyes looked older, not from age, but from understanding. "Morning, Ma," he said quietly. I didn't answer at first. I just looked at him, at the man who had once been my baby boy, who'd taken from me and then returned something more valuable than what he stole. "You drove all this way?" I asked finally. He nodded. "Finished my hours, got the certificate yesterday. Thought maybe—" He stopped, glanced down at the bundle in his hands, and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small cedar box, hand-carved, polished until it shone in the morning light. The scent hit me first clean, warm like memory. The lid was etched with simple initials, CE for ME. "It's not perfect," he said, his voice unsteady. "But I wanted you to have it. I used the leftover wood from the community center repairs. Thought maybe we could start again." I traced the carvings with my fingertips, the grain smooth beneath my touch. The craftsmanship was careful, deliberate, every corner squared, every joint clean. I opened it and found a folded note inside. "Debt paid, lesson learned, love still here." Something in my chest loosened the part that had been clenched since that night I stood in the wreck of my home. I set the box on the table, then reached up and touched his face. "You learned to listen to wood," I said softly. He blinked, a tear slipping down his cheek. "You taught me how." We sat on the porch for hours talking about nothing and everything, about the weather, about Ruth's roses, about his counseling sessions, about his plans to teach woodworking to kids at the community center. Somewhere between the laughter and the silences, I realized the distance that had stretched between us wasn't empty anymore. It was being rebuilt plank by plank. As the sun began to dip, Caleb stood and looked toward the street. "You know, he said I thought jail would have been worse." But it was the silence afterward that hurt the most. Not your anger, not the shame, the silence. That's when I realized what I'd really lost. I looked at him carefully. "You didn't lose it, Caleb. You just had to earn it back." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm still trying." I smiled. "Good, because I'm still your mother." When he drove away that evening, the sky burned orange and gold. I stood at the porch rail, holding the cedar box against my chest, the scent of sawdust and forgiveness mingling in the breeze. Inside, Robert's old chest gleamed in the fading light, the initials R and M-E, catching a soft glow from the window. For the first time, it didn't feel like a relic of what I'd lost. It felt like proof of what endured. That night, I placed the new box beside Robert's one small act of faith beside another. Then I sat at my desk, opened a blank page in my journal, and wrote, October 3rd. The day my son came home not to take, but to return something only time could carve honesty. As I closed the journal, the wind rattled the windows just enough to sound like laughter. I whispered into the stillness. "We did all right, Robert. We did all right." And for the first time in years, I slept deeply. Not because the world was perfect, but because I'd finally accepted that justice and love could live in the same house.